Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome to Chapter 3 in your Cengage textbook, From the Constitution to the Courtroom. So a lot of this we already went over in Module 2, but this is another important chapter, of course, digs in a little bit deeper. I kind of gave my own overview in Module 2, but I wanted to also give an overview here in Module 3. Now you'll notice there's another lecture uploaded as well, which is super helpful. So be sure to take a look at that because that really highlights from the healthcare perspective a little more information about healthcare specific challenges that we run into. So I found it helpful just to give you a broad overview and understanding. So Chapter 3. So some objectives by Chapter 3, you need to know about the Constitution, of course, and how it supports federalist government, the branches of government, which I'm sure all of you are already aware of, and the difference between federal and state law. Now, know about lawsuits, know about criminal and civil law, all those things that you hear about all the time. Some of you might watch true crime. I know a lot of people are into that nowadays in regards to, a lot of people listen to podcasts, and there's a lot of shows out there to try to solve mysteries, but now you can really dig into it from the perspective of, how the legal system works. So it's interesting to see the difference between criminal and civil law and some of the variations that happen in the courtroom. So we're going to talk some about that. It doesn't really get into a ton of detail, but you can take that as you will and go and do your own research as well. So this is not a law class by any means, but it's a broad overview, and I think it does a pretty good job here. But it all starts with the Constitution, right? A long time ago, the founders of our great country created the Constitution. It's not perfect by any means, but it worked to separate power in order for one group not to have power over another. So the three articles address three different branches, right? The executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch. So the executive would be the president in his office, the legislative would be the Senate and the Congress, right? And judicial would be the court system, including the Supreme Court. So you, I'm sure, are aware of that. The Supremacy Clause is something to be aware of as well. So it's a part of the federal government, federalist structure. So it tells us that federal law will govern when federal and state law conflict. So what does that mean? So that means like if there's a state law and there's a federal law, the federal law is always the trump. And when I say trump, I don't mean the president. I meant like it's ahead. So it's the one that is, of course, at the top of the ticket per se. So it's important to know that. So when you have a conflict, the federal law is always the one that is followed. Especially like that comes up a lot in healthcare, right? There's a lot of laws from the federal side that healthcare should be aware of, HIPAA being one. Maybe a state says, we don't want to comply with HIPAA. Well, it really wouldn't matter because you're getting Medicare and Medicaid funding more than likely if you're in a healthcare organization and you have to follow federal guidelines. So that is something that's important to know. How about enumerated powers? The Constitution enumerates the federal government powers. It's concurrent with the powers shared by the states. It's listed out by a number of things, and state might legislate issues that have been reserved to the federal government, provided the state laws do not conflict. So the state can have their own laws, and they can make things more stringent, is what this is saying, but you can't have conflicting laws, and it's up to your representatives, right? That's why we elect people for Congress, right? Seats in Congress, seats in the House of Representatives, and seats in the Senate in order to change that. So if they have a concern, like if your state has a concern, you can send people to Washington to change that. So, it's just saying you can't have your state, fighting the feds every second of the day, even though that does happen in some ways. How about the Interstate Commerce Clause? Legal authority for Congress to exercise legislative power over states where an act of commerce involves more than one state. So if there's multiple states, the feds can step in. That's not something to really have a lot of challenge with in healthcare, but that's an interesting thing to be aware of. And then the necessary and proper cause, it authorizes Congress to pass laws that are necessary and proper to carry out its powers. So that's kind of some general information. We're not going to do a knowledge check, but you can take a look at that if you wish. We talked about the branches of government, which are all important, the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. So what's the executive branch? That's the president, right? And the president's cabinet. So they're responsible for carrying out and executing the laws made by Congress. And this gets a little bit challenging, right? Because there's executive power that the president holds and the members of his cabinet, but laws are executed by the executive branch. That's why executed, right? Executive makes sense. But the legislative group, the Congress, is really in charge of not carrying out the laws. They're in charge of coming up with the laws. So that's a congressional thing, and sometimes that gets skewed, right? There's been arguments about that in a lot of media today. So now you know the intention. So it's important to think about that from that perspective. Congress. How about the House of Representatives, right? It's the largest body, so it consists of 435 members. And then you have your senators, and they are 100 senators total in the U.S., so each state has 2. So from that perspective, the terms for senators and representatives are different, and you can take a look at that when you get a chance, but the terms are going to be different. So senators actually serve longer. I'm going to look it up. I can't remember off the top of my head. That's what Google's good for, right? So senators serve a 6-year term, and it's staggered over 7 years. Only about a third of the Senate is up for re-election at a time. Oh no, it's staggered over even years. I read that wrong. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I knew they served 6 years. I couldn't remember off the top of my head. But senators serve 6 years, and House members, I think it's 2 years. Yep, House members serve every 2 years. So the challenge for House members, right? They have to run for office a lot more. So if they don't do a good job, they're voted out pretty quickly. And I don't know the exact history of why it's that way, but I think that's interesting to know. So your senators, they serve a longer time. All right, what's the judiciary, right? The judicial branch. It interprets whether laws that the Congress comes up with are constitutional, and it exists both in federal and state systems. So you have federal courts, and then you have state courts. And there's 3 different concepts on the court side. You have your trial court, your mid-level appellate court, and your highest level appellate court. And each state has that. And then, of course, on the federal side, highest level appellate court would be the Supreme Court. This is a great graph. So how it works from the federal side, you have your Superior Court, your trial court, your appellate court, and then your state Supreme Court. On the federal side, that's the state appeals path. But your federal side is just Federal District Court, United States Court of Appeals, and they all transition up to the U.S. Supreme Court, right? And the U.S. Supreme Court, they're appointed for life. Judges are appointed for life altogether. And those terms in states as well last, for the entirety of their service. So keep that in mind. When you appoint someone to the Supreme Court or another judge seat, that's a place for life for them. Confuse you, so that's on the Fed side. But on the state side, there can be differences depending on the state. Like I'm looking at Washington Superior Court. So Superior Court judges in the state of Washington are elected to 4-year terms. Vacancies between elections are filed by the governor. So depending on the state, there can be some differences there. And I haven't researched every state, but you guys are more than welcome to do that, and I probably will on my own time at some point. But I just want you to know the structure of how the court system works, and that's just an overview. Is healthcare federal or state law? It's a little bit of both, right? There's no express federal powers related to healthcare in the Constitution, but both the feds and the state really concentrate on making sure that we have the necessary protections for our patients. Like this section, we talk about administrative and common law. Administrative law is just kind of how it sounds. It's agencies that perform the following: rulemaking, education, prosecution, advising. It governs activities of administrative agencies, right? Common law, which is kind of a little more important, came over from England, right? English common law. It's court-made law that arises from judges' interpretation of statutory or regulatory law. So a judge will look at, hey, what is this in relation to the law? They'll interpret it, and then they'll, of course, set their precedent based on their interpretation. So judges are bound to adhere by the principle of, it's a Latin term, and I'm not going to try to pronounce it. It's let the decision stand. So there's a lot of Latin terminology in the judicial side of course, law. So make sure you're aware of that. And it's actually a test question, just as an FYI. So good to know. Common law. It's a court-made system. So it came over from Europe, like I said, and we use it today. What's the difference between criminal and civil law? Criminal law is it's concerned with offenses prosecuted by the state or federal law when a person has been proven guilty of such offense. In a criminal case, you can be guilty or not guilty. And common law is concerned with disputes between individuals, where a case does not relate in the violation of a criminal statute. So common law is more civil. In a civil case, of course, defendant is found liable or not liable. So criminal law and civil law, a lot different. So you have to have in, of course, criminal and civil law standard of proof. It's a proof required considering evidence and witnesses, right? So your evidence, your witnesses will be considered standard of proof. Standard in a civil case is preponderance of evidence. And in a criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. So did the court or a jury find someone beyond a reasonable doubt guilty of what is charged against them? And you can see the challenge with this, right? When you have a jury, sometimes you can have some members that don't believe that, and it's up to the prosecutor in order to convince the jury that it actually happened. So it's one good thing about our court system and one challenge in relation to accountability. So most common civil law in healthcare is a tort. So what's a tort? Tort liability is considered negligence, really, more than anything else. Intentional, and what you mostly see is negligence. So you do something to a patient on accident you didn't mean to do. Part of it is maybe you didn't prepare the way you should, so that would be considered negligence. That's the most common thing that we see in healthcare. So what happens during a lawsuit? I hear a lot about lawsuits in healthcare in my time that I've spent in the business, and most of the time it doesn't go to trial. Most of the time it's settled, right? That's a good thing, but a lot of times it's adverse reactions from a patient, and a lot of times the provider did everything they could, and in some cases they were negligent. So we're always hopeful that it's arbitrated before court. I have seen them go to court, but sometimes it's inevitable. But we always hope that it's arbitrated prior. But it depends on the situation, right? I can't say it's always something that needs to be arbitrated. It depends on the situation. Skipped ahead a little bit. Hold on one second. The next section here is going to talk about the phases of a lawsuit in healthcare, and you can look over this. So it talks about step by step what happens from the perspective of a patient coming up with a concern and potentially even going to court. So I'm skipping ahead in slides. I apologize for doing that. Probably giving you a little bit of challenge here with the slideshow, but take a look at that. It really goes phase by phase, jumping into potentially a trial if that happens. And again, like I said, most of the time it's arbitrated prior to trial. That's really a broad overview of this great chapter. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about you as a witness and the art of arbitration, but there's some great information in here. Again, a lot of it went over in Module 2, but I wanted to give you another overview. Be sure, of course, to get your review questions done this week. And if you have any questions for me, never hesitate to reach out. I look forward to hearing back from you. And I appreciate all your efforts so far. Thanks so much.